Howdy out there, rock and rollers. Welcome to the 78th edition of the Ugly American Werewolf in London Rock Podcast, recorded here in central London, just off historic Abbey Road. We are a proud member of the Pantheon Podcast network of shows, about 100 different shows on all sorts of genres of music with some great hosts who really know their stuff, some amazing guests, really talking about anything you might want to learn more about it. You can learn more about Pantheon Pods at Pantheon Pods or www.pantheonpodcast.com. And speaking of Pantheon Pods, this week we're going to be speaking with one of our Pantheon Podcast brethren, Mr. Paul Stephenson, who has a really killer show, Vintage Rock Pod. Paul is a rock DJ who's been in the game for a long time, and he has some killer guests on his show. I mean, members of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, members of bands that you know and love. He has them on weekly, usually on Mondays is when he has his interviews. Now, the rest of the week, Tuesday through Sunday, he also has a really fun This Day Rocks show, which is about 5, 6, 7 minutes. Kind of gives you just a little detail about events that may have happened on this day in rock history, talk about people's birthdays, and then he'll have guests on, whether it's musicians or members of bands who are on his main show, or maybe even guests like me. I've been on the show several times and will be again here coming up soon. Just a fun way for me to start my day, whether it's with your morning cuppa or it's at the end of the day or just whenever you've got a break. I highly recommend listening to Paul. He's got a wonderful voice. He's very knowledgeable and is a super nice guy. And the reason we're having Paul on today is to talk about one of my very favorite bands, my favorite band of the last 30 years, and that's Oasis. Now, Oasis couldn't be bigger over here. They talk about Oasis over here like the second coming of the Beatles. And I don't think you can tell the story of Oasis without the UK perspective. Now, in fairness, I wasn't into Oasis when they first broke in America in the early to mid-90s. I was still very much a classic rock guy at that point and did not love what my colleagues the same age were listening to at the time. So I overlooked them. But the story of Oasis is not just about the music. It's about a cultural shift here in the UK that was going on politically, socially, artistically, all around the UK. And the real headpiece, the talisman for all of that were Oasis. Not only was their music fantastic, the great guitar and songwriting of Noel Gallagher and the cocksure melodic vocals of Liam Gallagher, but just their attitude. Talk about how great they were all the time. I think it gave Brits a sense of, yes, we are still a great country. We do still have a lot of say in what goes on here. And these are the lads that are going to help us take us into the new millennium. And my American friends never really understand why I love Oasis so much. Well, it's because their songs are fantastic. The melody, the chord changes, the lyrics, and the evolution of them over time, I think it's all great. Plus, the lads are touring this summer. Not Oasis, but individually, Noel and Liam are both touring, and I am going to get to see Noel. I don't think I'm going to be able to get to see Liam, but you never know. And so you can't tell the story to an American about how great Oasis are without the UK perspective, and that's what Paul is going to bring to us today, because he was one of those teenagers who was standing outside in line to get the first single off the new album, or to get the new album the day it was released. Went to see them live. He and his mates started a band because of Oasis, because their songs are not only catchy, they're fairly simple. So you can learn them in an afternoon. And I don't think he was the only one. I think that was a phenomena around the UK at the time, all thanks to Oasis. Now, before we get into that, we want you to tweet us at ugly_werewolf and at actionjack72, and make sure you download and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, be it Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Google Play. Good Pods is a great way to meet independent podcasters and find which podcasts are best for you. So come on, it's time to talk about Oasis in the UK versus the US with Paul from Vintage Rock Pod right here on The Wolf. Yeah, and welcome to the Ugly American Werewolf in London, Mr. Paul Stephenson of Vintage Rock Pod and This Day Rocks.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
And I love the new This Day Rocks, man. I mean, it's a great way to start off your day. Remind you of what the date is, understand maybe whose birthday it is or who died on that date, and then you get a little information, a little fun chat with somebody about something that happened on this day in rock. It's only about 5 or 6 minutes. Good with your morning cuppa, I think. I like it a lot, and I love being on it with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for taking the time to be on a few episodes that you've guested on. It's always nice to get different people's opinions, and I get lots of different people's opinions, lots of different podcasters. We have writers, we have authors, we have guests themselves. Obviously, I've got a big back catalogue of interviews, so I like to take little clips of that. So it doesn't take up much of your day, so it's just nice to put out there every single day for somebody.
Yeah, no, we appreciate it.
Yeah, it was interesting. You said you were going to be on there, and I said 6-minute show. What is this all about? It's really it's really cool. It's a little like you said, it's a warm up. You get a little information. You get somebody's point of view. Yeah, I like it. And then you're ready to start your day. Now I know now I'm in the know.
Oh, thank you very much. It's lovely to hear. It's nice feedback. But yeah, it was just one of those things that I thought would be quite nice to add along to the big interview shows that I do. And it's just something that kind of can fill a gap, whether it's just before you go to sleep, or whether the first thing you do in the morning, or it's your coffee break at work, or whatever it is. It's just nice and easy to fit into your day, and a bit of nice rock content for you.
Indeed. No, it's a lot of fun. And we appreciate you coming on here today. Part of our show, Ugly American Werewolf, it's not just my adventures as an expat in London, and me and Jackson talking about stuff that we've loved our whole lives. But it's really about the UK perspective as a fan versus what we experienced in the US growing up kind of throughout our lives. And if you look at our shows, I just went ahead and did this last night. It was like 65% of them or so were on UK bands. And then, we have some compilation and year-end shows, so it might actually be more than that. But we're kind of Anglophiles in what we love. However, we don't have the same experience. Like a show we did earlier, like a month ago, we talked about the Simple Minds. In America, to most fans, the Simple Minds are one song in one movie, maybe two songs. Over here, in 1985, as you would say, people are like, U2 and Simple Minds, who's bigger? Who's going to reign as champions? Where in the U.S., it's like, U2 play stadiums, Simple Mind might play a club somewhere, It's like, but why? Simple Minds are awesome, They have dozens of great hits. And you can't tell the story of Oasis, who is one of my favorite bands, my very favorite band of the last 30 years, without the UK perspective and without the history of what was happening in the UK culturally.
Yes.
And in that time leading up really to Nebworth. There are two great documentaries on Oasis. Supersonic, which kind of takes them from childhood and starting the band up until playing Nebworth in 96. And then Oasis Nebworth movie, which basically follows, about a dozen different fans plus the band on that day, basically, what it meant to get the tickets, how, 2.5 million people put in for 250,000 tickets, and how could a band that only has 2 records sell more tickets than Pink Floyd did a few years before there? How does that even make sense?
It is. It's absolutely baffling. But I think, like you said, you have to immerse yourself in that time period. They joked about being as big as the Beatles and things like that. But to be honest, living in the UK at the time, it was Cool Britainnia. It was girl power. It was Britpop. Everything seemed like we were the center of the universe at that point. And the center of the universe were these feuding Mancunian brothers who were on the front page of every tabloid newspaper every day with something, whether they were saying something disgusingly outrageous where they had to issue groveling apologies, or whether they were seen falling out of clubs with Kate Moss, or you know what I mean. They were everything. They were the archetypal rock stars. They came from nothing. They were just the biggest things in the world. Which, if I can just ask a quick question of you, I mean, Oasis. I mean, at the time, we could never understand how they didn't make it in America. Why they didn't really break America. So, why do you like them? What was the fascination for you?
Okay, so I have to be perfectly honest with you. At the time, when they're breaking 93, 94, 95, Jackson and I are in college together, I'm ignoring them, okay? At that time, I'm not into them. And I've said this on other shows before. Jackson and I were into very classic rock. We're in the 70s Stones phase at that point, and the Stones came back in 94 and toured, The 90s kind of became a bit of a revival for a lot of bands. Like the Eagles were never going to get back together. Well, in 1994 they did, and then they started touring, right? The Stones toured on Voodoo Lounge. Jimmy Page and Robert Plant got back together to do Unleaded, and then they did a couple tours. We saw them. In 96, when Oasis is breaking out with these huge shows at Nebworth. Kiss got back together with the original members. Kiss was the biggest tour of 1996 in America, and so that's kind of where we were. And I was biased towards, if people my age like it, it must suck. Okay, because people my age made New Kids on the Block possible, and I hated that. It's like I couldn't stand that stuff, right? So I'm like, if you like it, if girls my age like it, it couldn't be that good. So I just kind of ignored it. Not to mention, at the time, these guys, first of all, every fourth or fifth word out of their mouth is fuck or cunt or shit or something nasty. They don't dress like rock stars. They've got two huge unibrows between the two of them. Bonehead's bald at 23 years old. It's like, these aren't rock stars, And that was just kind of my take. I don't know. What do you say to all that, Jackson?
Well, I remember when the first single dropped. I think, or the one that I remember the best was Supersonic, and it dropped, and I was like, I really like this. This sounds good. It was kind of, it was mean. It had a great guitar riff to it. And who are these guys? Oasis from England. Okay, well, like you said before, Mac, we like English bands. All right, let's give these guys a whirl. Cigarettes and Alcohol was a great tune also.
Love it.
Okay. Then they put out What's the Story? And it was like, oh, now they went like poppy, that was the one that kind of moved away from me. And then there was the whole thing about that MTV, I think it was MTV concert where Liam was sick. Yeah. And they went on without him. And then all of a sudden, wait a minute, now he's in the balcony and he's got the drink. And I'm like, okay, the wheels are coming off this thing. This is a train wreck. People were like, are they the new Beatles? Well, now, wait a minute. They only have one album out. How could they be the new Beatles? So I think in America, maybe they got turned off by, they weren't really, they didn't have the classic rock star look. Yeah. They were always at each other's throats. It might have just been a little bit too much. Yeah. Like you said, now they're partying with Kate Moss. Who do these guys think they are? So I think that was it for me anyway. That was kind of where I got turned off to them. But then going back and listening to the stuff kind of after the fact, you'd see how great they really were.
So good.
Yeah, it just the way that they could put the songs together. And when you kind of listen to them, and I'm going to ask you this question, Paul, do you think there was a vacuum at the time in the UK? Like, so they were basically at the right moment at the right time when people said, yes, this is exactly what we're looking for. Kind of like rewind a couple of years in the United States. Nirvana in 1991. Yes, it kind of sounded like everybody was like, hey, wait a minute. This is it. This is what we want. It kind of seemed like watching some of the documentary stuff about Oasis. It was kind of that way in the UK.
Yeah, it was almost like this is our movement. This is something that we own. This is coming from ours, and it's not your toffs. They're not university students. These are guys off the streets that are playing fantastic music, the likes of which we haven't heard for a long time, and they have the attitude and that sort of stuff. So I think you are right there, definitely.
And I don't know. I kind of associate it almost with like the cultural revolution that happened in the 60s in the U.S. almost. It's kind of like post-World War II, it was very picket fence, mom and pop through the 50s. And then at the end of the 60s, these kids are growing up. It's like, no, I'm not doing it just because that's the way you used to do it. I'm not doing it just because you told me that. I'm not trusting the government just because they said, no, it's just an exercise in Vietnam kind of thing. And I feel like that was something happening over here that we didn't really catch on to, right? It's like we're getting out of Thatcherism. Tony Blair is coming in. Young people are starting to feel themselves. Cool Britainnia, you had fashion coming back. You had movies with like Train Spotting and Guy Ritchie is coming up, and you've got, there were a lot of different bands in it, but it was like Oasis were the pinnacle of it. And this kind of stuff that might have turned people off for, like the press are like, oh, these are bad boys. And people are like, oh, no, we shouldn't pay attention. Now everyone's like soaking that up like, yeah, these are our lovely lad bad boys. This is what it's all about.
I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, if you look through culturally at that time, you mentioned Thatcherism. John Major came in, so again, that's conservative government, but by 97, we're into Labour and everything's changed. It's new Labour. We're talking about Oasis being the leaders of Britpop, and it's no coincidence that Noel had the GB flag on his guitar, and that was an iconic visual of the movement as well. Probably the same as the girl power movement with Jerry or the Spice Girls. She had the Brit dress as well, and that was seen as something that was quite. But culturally within society, things were changing. It was your 1830s lads' holidays. There was the ladette movement as well. I mean, you look at the biggest radio station in the UK, BBC Radio 1, was then presented. The Breakfast Show, the biggest show, was presented by a female. Zoe Ball came in during the 90s, and she was married to Fatboy Slim. And it was all the whole, like you said, the time of the 60s, it was a period of change. The period of change in the 90s was definitely a revolution from the mean and ogre of Thatcher in the 80s and everything that went on to being the loutish, over the top, let's go hedonistic, because all the dance movement as well, you kind of forget that was early 90s was coming through, and you've got all the acid and the raves and all that sort of stuff that was going on. So it was, I think it was a way of society kicking back and saying, no, we want something different. And the Gallagher Brothers were something different indeed, and they led that whole Britpop movement. And you said there's a lot of other bands there. There's a lot of other great bands there. Castor, a band, Ocean Colour Scene, another great band. There was others that kind of fit into that mold as well, like the Blue Tones and the Charlatans and all these sorts of bands that came. And maybe slightly before that, the Stone Roses too. And yeah, it was just a whole movement, Cooler Shaker, people like these that all came through at the same time.
And that was kind of part of the problem that we had in the US. You know, I mentioned Nirvana and all of the grunge bands. It was kind of like they were seen as authentic, and they were seen as, you know, guys who could rock, but it was really kind of depressing. Like there wasn't they were like guys like Eddie Vedder and Chris Cornell and you know, Kurt
Lane
Cobain.
Staley,
They were all rock stars, but like, let's face it, Liam Gallagher is a rock star.
Yeah, he is.
You want somebody who is just like, what is he doing now? I can't. Oh my goodness, he's falling down. He can't play because he has laryngitis. Now he's drunk. He's on the, you know, that's what you. When it's working for you, it's fantastic. When it works against you, I can only imagine like what the rest of the band went through. But that's what you want out of a rock star. That is truly somebody that you don't ever be like this guy, but you know you want to.
Yes. And I think the whole band did fall through that sort of thing, because like Bonehead and Grigsby, they did fall out pretty quickly, and there was obviously substances in the background that was being used by everybody and things like that. So it definitely was something that the whole band immersed themselves in, and it was the scene at the time, perhaps, for them guys.
But you got to figure too. I mean, like you said, these were just guys from a working class family.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. And they put this band together, and all of a sudden you're in the stratosphere. There, what do I do now? I don't understand. I've got a lot of downtime. There's a lot of people that want to know me. All of a sudden, women who would never talk to me in a million years can't wait to get in line. More, you know, your head just explodes. And I think at a certain time, you just get to the point where you're like, you know what? I am a rock star, and I deserve all this, and I can do whatever I want. And then that's when the wheels really come off.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, but I want to talk about Noel's songwriting, because now I consider Noel one of the greatest rock songwriters of all time. And that second record, What's the Story, Morning Glory, the record itself isn't even the whole story. Those 10 or 11 songs, whatever it is, there's a whole nother album's worth of quote unquote B-sides or CD singles that, again, that's not really part of all culture in America. Yes, we had CD singles.
Okay.
But they were kind of collector's items. They didn't really sell that well. And most people didn't really, oh, the new single's out, let's go out and get it. No, you buy the album, and basically all the singles are going to be on there, kind of thing. So it's part of their strategy.
That's where Oasis did. Oasis did so well, because I was one of those teenagers that was out buying every single single, whether I had the album, which I did, whether I had the album or not. I went out and bought the single because it had 3 other tracks on there. Now, back then, the 3 other tracks were, for other bands, other acts, they were maybe a remix, a dance version, a demo. There
maybe a live version,
yes, that sort of thing. Whereas Oasis, every single single had 3 new songs that you hadn't heard before, and whether they were offshoots from albums they didn't make the album, or whether it was just something they were playing around with, all the B-sides stack up. And one of my favorite Oasis songs is a B-side, Head Shrinker. It's a really strong nihilistic kind of rock wall of sound sort of song, but that's why they came out with a master plan with all the B-sides on there as well, and that sold just as well as any of their other albums or studio albums, as they'd be labeled.
Yeah, no, Rocking Chair, amazing chord changes in that, and it's telling a story that we can all kind of relate to. I'm older than I wish to be. This town holds no more for me. I get that, you know. Universal stuff. They come to America, they play the Whiskey a Go-Go to kind of launch themselves in America, but they scored a bunch of crystal meth they thought was cocaine. It keeps them up for a few days. They can't really play the show. They have to start and stop the show, which is so Bush League. And then Noel's like, forget it. You guys, I'm out of here. He splits for a few days. Well, he comes back, but in those few days, he writes Talk Tonight. It's like the guy couldn't miss during this time. The first album, second album, huge. He was just on fire.
And I think that the beauty of his songwriting is the simplicity of it, man. Back in the 90s, everybody wanted to learn the guitar. Everyone picked up a guitar. I started a band. I was in a band. We all did that. We covered Morning Glory was one of the songs that we covered. But it was one of those that you pick up a guitar and within half an hour you could probably play an Oasis song because the chords themselves were really simple. The chord progressions were really simple. The solos, let's be honest, they're not Jimmy Page. They are really simple as well. But it's the fact that the melody and the hook of the songs and the wall of sound that's created, because there was two guitarists and a bass player, and it was this. You listen to the bigger songs; they are just epic. They fill your ears. There's no blank bits in there. There's obviously the odd quieter song, but a lot of their big songs are really, really atmospheric, and they enclose you when you listen to the songs, which I find really, really good. But as you said, with his songwriting, it's just something that he's won many awards, Ivor Novellos, that sort of thing, for his songwriting abilities, and a lot of them do stand the test of time, which is all you can ask for as a songwriter.
That's right.
But one thing that they did point out, I believe it was on the Supersonic documentary, was when they recorded the second record, Liam was knocking it out of the park with his vocals. Like they said he would do it in one take. He knew the phrasing, he knew the words. So really, I think that while a lot of the credit does go to Noel for being the songwriter and kind of the
chief,
the chief of the band, and where Liam's, I think, legacy gets a lot dragged into the other activities. He really is a great singer, great front man. When he's on, he is really good at what he does.
When he's on is the key.
Well, right, that's the thing. And there was a thing too about how Noel was away as a roadie, and he comes back, and their mom says, "Oh yeah, they started a band." What do you mean he started a band?
Yeah, Liam
he can't sing. Well, actually, he can really sing. He's actually pretty good at this. So I think that to your point, I think all the ingredients lined up for this band. They had the front guy, they had the voice, they had the songs, they just had everything to be at the right place at the right time to launch them. And I think there is something to be said for a song that's a little bit on the simple side. I mean, we love AC/DC, right? If you're a kid and you pick up the guitar and you mess with it a little bit, you can play. Oh, I'm playing this song now. I can do this. I mean, you can't.
Maybe not the solo.
Well, no,
right.
But at least the original riff, like there is something to connect you to it. Whereas, something like you're not going to play, Stairway to Heaven right off the bat. You're just not. So it makes it a little more accessible.
Yeah, 100%. And just touching on the point with Liam there, I mean, I think What's the Story probably was the peak. And you saw in later performances, later recordings, that the voice had gone, I think, pretty early on. And his style, you talk about all the ingredients coming together. There wasn't anything like Liam at the time. There has been since, the drawl, but even in the way he sings, you mentioned the phrasing, the yeah on the end of things. It was just so uniquely him and so uniquely Oasis. And it was just, I don't know where it came from, but it worked.
The other thing too is I noticed that, and I don't know if this is a conscious thing with a lot of people when they sing, I don't know if they try and get rid of an accent or I don't know, but it sounds like he does not. There are words, like, oh, and so I don't know if that's a conscious deal, but it definitely adds to his uniqueness in the vocal delivery. The other thing he was saying too was that, and I know that there are a lot of singers that have this problem. The rest of the guys it's easy. You could be sick. You could not feel well. You pick the guitar up, you can play the guitar. If your voice is out, hey, we got to do this show. No, you don't understand. I'm not feeling this. There's something wrong. I can't do this. And now everybody's mad at you. And then are you really not feeling well? Or is this something else that you've done to yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, with the voice thing, I always wondered with the microphone placement. I mean, we kind of saw it a bit with Lemmy, but to sing with your neck extended and pointed up the whole time, that can't be easy at all. But again, it was the look. It was so iconic. The fact that he stood with his hands behind his back, his head was pointed up towards a microphone that seemed to be far too high for him. It was just I do wonder how on earth he came about singing like that. Did he approach a microphone that was too tall for him one day and think I quite like this, or it's bizarre.
He opens his throat, I guess, maybe to get all that sound out. I don't know. But those nights in Nebworth, he was on, and he was giving it too. I mean, there's probably some nights where he's like, it's just, a bunch of punters in a club. I can do whatever I want. But when you see that sea of people and it's for you, he knew he had to deliver, and boy, did he ever, man. It was pretty amazing. I also, in rewatching that, felt like, there's this big Beatles connection with Oasis. It's almost like he's channeling a young but pissed off John Lennon in his voice, because he's not Paul McCartney, but he's kind of got that Lennon attitude in his voice, and when he holds those notes, I can kind of see where all that was coming from a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they've self-admitted that they are huge fans of the Beatles, and they kind of modeled themselves, didn't they, and musically on them. So that could definitely be a point indeed.
Hey, this is Tom and Zeus from Shout It Out Loudcast,
and you are listening to the Ugly American Werewolf in London Rock podcast.
All right, so tell us a little bit about where you were at that time, right? So we were in college, we were kind of ignoring them. I got really into them in the 2000s, and I'm glad I did, because I got into them right before they put out Don't Believe the Truth, which to me is a fantastic record. It's their second best, in my opinion, and I got to see them on that tour, which was amazing. But tell us kind of where you were in life and how Oasis kind of fit into do it with you.
Yeah, so I'm probably the opposite way around then. So I'm early 40s now. So when Oasis were coming through, I was young teens, and it was something different. It was something that your parents didn't want you to listen to because of all the swearing and all the naughtiness that was going on, and it's the sort of thing you did queue up outside the shop for every single, and we did do that. Like I said, I did buy every single. I bought every album that came out. I remember when Be Here Now came out, I pre-ordered the double box set of the album at the time on vinyl. Now, vinyl in the mid-90s was not a thing that anybody wanted, but I saw it in a magazine and it looked fantastic, and I spent 30 of my hard-earned pounds on pre-ordering this album on vinyl when I don't even think I had a turntable, but I wanted this thing because it was what everyone had. And my first proper concert was Oasis on that Be Here Now tour as well. And I remember there was me and 3 of my friends, and we had tickets for the seating section at a big arena show. And we got there really early because we wanted to get a t-shirt and all that sort of stuff. As young guys, I think we were about 17, 18 by this point. So we wanted to get there and get good seats and that sort of stuff. So we sat there. And then these 3 girls and a guy approached us up the stairs, and they said, "We've got standing tickets. Do you want to swap? We don't fancy being in the middle of all that." And we were like, hell yeah.
Yeah.
So we went right down the front for our first gig, and I'll never forget that they came out to Be Here Now, the song itself, and it was like do 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 do, and that was playing on a loop. It must have been 3 or 4 minutes, and the stage is dark and the anticipation's building, and then they must have all sneaked on because nobody saw them, and then the down kicked in. The whole place started jumping. Now, I'm not a tall guy. I'm 5'8" now. So back then I was probably 5'6" or something. So I remember being swept off my feet. It's one of those where you go like that and just hold on for dear life, and you hope that you don't get drowned underneath a sea of feet. And it was just an incredible experience. And for me at the time, Oasis were the biggest band in the world. I hung on every word they said. I bought the NME religiously because they were always on the front of that. I lived with my grandparents. They were always buying tabloids, and I was always looking for anything they could have, anything I bought the videos, there was a few VHS before then. There and Then was a live video of them at Main Road, the old Manchester City football stadium, and I remember wearing that tape out because I had it on all the time. There was another one as well. I was trying to rack my brains what it was called, but I couldn't remember it. There was another live show that they brought out on VHS a few years before that, and it was just they were the center of everything for me. But then by the time Be Here Now had come and gone, and I think the band's own reaction to it, because I did like the album, I really did like the album, but Noel panned it as soon as it came out, and they got through the tour and they'd sold as many copies as they could. He came out and he said it wasn't good, I didn't write it well, over the top, blah 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 blah. And so for me, they lost their edge, and at that stage I'm then going off to university and I'm thinking of different things. And so whereas you're picking them up in the early 2000s, I dropped them by this point. I'd had enough. The sheen had gone. I was sick of hearing about them fighting. They've broken up again, have they? Oh yeah, sorry, they'll do a gig next week. It got boring for me. It was funny. So yeah, probably the way you experienced it is the opposite. So I lived through the mania of the 90s, and then when the 2000s came, it was I've had enough, see you later.
No, I hear you, and that's part of why I wanted to have you on, because I'm looking at this beautiful book here, the British hits, singles, and albums. It's been an important resource to us here on The Wolf, and it's like basically from 97 through into the 2000s, every record, every single basically went to the top 5, not the top 40, the top 5. And basically every album went to number 1. And of course we heard Champagne Supernova and Wonderwall and, back in the States, but they were just kind of songs on the radio. I think the first time I heard All Around the World was in an AT&T commercial. They were kind of helping to sell long distance or something like that. So I'm like, okay, well they've made it. They're pretty big, but I was still ignoring them. So I'm like, all right, well how did they do on the charts in America? And they've had 3 singles hit the top 100 Billboard. That's it. 3 singles hit the top 100.
The whole career.
Their whole career. Now there's different charts in America. Obviously, there's mainstream rock chart, and they would have been on that a lot more. But I'm just talking about the Billboard Hot 100, which has everything: pop, rock, R&B, rap, whatever. 3, and I think it was Wonderwall made it to the top 40 or so. Don't Look Back in Anger may have been top 80, and then there was a song that I barely even knew made it to 93 or something like that, and that was it. I'm like, you got to be kidding me! For Oasis, this is a joke, I mean, they're huge.
No, that is interesting when you mention that, because I think that comes back to the question I asked you at the very start. So it was. We couldn't understand here in the UK. Obviously, we are, just as you guys were in America, you're very American-centric, and what was big in America was big in the world. And same with us with the Cool Britainnia and the Britpop. Everything seemed to be revolving around what we were doing. But it became a thing in the media and the press as well, the fact that the guys would go over to the States and they wouldn't quite conquer it. They wouldn't get the adulation or the following or the sales or that we felt they deserved, because put away the hype, put away the mischievous behavior, that's a nice way of putting it. The music itself was good enough to sell. It should have been big. Right. It should have been bigger than we were in America. So it was a strange thing. And like I said, the press did ask the question why, because it was always, every time they were going to go over, it was like, this is it, they're going to break America this time. And they'd come back and there'd been another falling out or something had happened and America hadn't picked it up. And it was just, it was strange because, like I said, they were the biggest band in the world to us here in the UK at the time.
Well, I think the problem in the United States is that we're jerks, and if you don't pander to us, we're kind of like, whatever. Like, I think because you asked that at the beginning, I was thinking, I'm like, yeah, what was the problem? I think part of it was the fighting, but I also think, like, had they moved to California, relocated. Oh, okay. Well, but they were always very, very British.
Very British.
They never really played the game over here, even though we enjoyed the music. I think that may have led to some of the wall that was put up here, because like I said, you have to buy into the American lifestyle for us to really embrace you. Right.
And look, they sold well in America. I mean, the first album went platinum. Be Here Now went platinum. What's the Story? Morning Glory sold about 4 million copies. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, especially in the 90s. That's good stuff. But you sell 4 million copies. That's cool. That's quadruple platinum here. Whereas in America, whereas over here, where they sold about 5 million copies, that's like 16, 17 times platinum. Not to mention, at the time, that kind of means that about every 1 out of 10 or 11 people in the whole nation have a copy of that. Well, in America, if 1 out of every 10 people have it, that's Thriller, man. Okay, I mean, there's not much else. There's nowhere else to go. So it's not that they did poorly, despite the fact they didn't really have the top 10 singles or anything over here. 4 million records is good, but
Yeah.
it's not like having everybody on your block has one, right?
Yeah. And I think that's the feeling we had of Oasis at the time. I mean, definitely maybe was the biggest selling debut album of all time in the UK at the point. I think it sold ridiculous levels as well. I think it was the quickest selling debut album as well, things like that. They had the biggest audience for indoor gigs at Earl's Court. They had the biggest audience for the outdoor gigs at Nebworth. They had What's the Story was one of the biggest selling albums even to date. I think it's in the top 5 in the UK of all time.
Oh, sure.
And then Be Here Now was one of the fastest selling albums as well. Everything, it was like they were the biggest. They were the best, whatever it was. And then they go to America and it was like you said, I mean, 4 million records, that's incredible for anybody. But it felt like they hadn't conquered. They hadn't done enough.
Yeah, and I had to look it up because I'm like, okay, well, what were we listening to? I'm like, yeah, the number one selling album in America, I think, at least a rock album in America in '94 was Hootie and the Blowfish, and I'll admit I had the album, but I didn't have Oasis at that point because I was in college, and college girls love that "Hold My Hand" song. So if I was going to have ladies back to the dorm room, I had to have Crack Rear View. I looked it up, Paul. It sold 21 million copies in America alone. It's double diamond, and it's a debut album. And I'm like, that must have been a reaction to the grunge. Like the grunge was hard, and life sucks, and people are mean to me, and I'm going to fight through this. I'm not going to be pretty. I'm going to be ugly, and you're going to like it, and all the ugly people are going to rise up. And I think we needed something softer maybe at that point, and these guys, they're all college buddies. I want to be with you, it's happy little songs. They're digestible. You could listen to it with your parents around. And Dave Matthews was getting huge at that point, and I got sucked up into the whole Dave Matthews thing, and now I'm like, what did I ever see in Dave Matthews? I don't get it, I went to see him 6 times, and the last time I'm like, what is wrong with me, man? These trends happen, and what's popular, with people of a certain age, you kind of get swept up in it. So I think the whole, we're the baddest band in the world, and we're gonna cuss and do drugs and date Patsy Kensit in your face and all that stuff. I think people are kind of like, can we do a little something else now? I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because you can't mention Oasis without mentioning Blur. And I think Blur are probably what you're talking about there. It's the other side of the coin. They were the college kids. They did come out with the quirky songs like Country House and Park Life and all that sort of stuff. And they were just as big as Oasis. Not quite as big, but they still had huge hits and huge following. But again, it was like they were the cleaner cut guys. You know what I mean? They looked quite nice. They looked like they were probably studying art at university, that sort of stuff. Whereas the Gallagher brothers certainly weren't at any university at all.
No, that's for sure. But you had because Blur, I couldn't tell you one Blur song. Blur was non-existent to us in the United States. Not the Stone Roses had one big record that kind of came before. The Verve, had some hits, of course. Verve, but it's weird to me who makes it and who doesn't. And sometimes I always tend to blame like the A&R people, like they just dropped the ball. They didn't know what they were doing, or they didn't get them on MTV or whatever, they did wrong. But it's obviously there's a lot more to it than that. And it's a lot about timing and culture and that kind of thing. And it's a bit of magic that nobody has the recipe for.
Yes, if only you could bottle it, you'd make a fortune.
Wasn't Blur do that song number 2? It's like
song 2, yeah.
Song 2, right? That's a pretty good. I crank that one up still. That still rips it up. But yeah, they never made it. And like you said, the Stone Roses. I remember one. They had a single out on college radio that never hit. Wow. I don't know. I think it is a cultural thing, but I think it is also like what are they going to push? And I thought about that. For a long time when I sit alone with my thoughts in the dark, which I probably shouldn't. But I remember when Smells Like Teen Spirit hit on MTV, they played it every 14 minutes. But then I got to thinking, if you did that with any song, would it work? Like if you just played it to the point where it's like it's just in your, I don't know. I was never into Nirvana. That was never my scene. But I just really wonder how some songs make it like that and some songs don't. Do you think why doesn't everybody know, this particular song? This is way better. They should be playing it way more. I don't understand the formula.
Yeah, I think, like you say, it is culture. I think it is absolutely 100%.
Yeah.
No,
I think a lot of it too is just like you were saying, Mac, before, just everything lines up. Like, it's just the time. What are people looking for? Even if it's like an album that maybe came out that you missed for whatever reason, it got swept under the rug, or it was just in the ether with everything else. Why wasn't this a bigger record? Because people weren't ready to hear it at that time, at least where you were.
Yeah. No, and I'm just looking at the stats that I was mentioning earlier. Wonderwall hit number 8 on the Billboard 100. Okay, that's good. Top 10 in America. Nothing wrong with that. Easily, they're the highest ever. Don't Look Back in Anger got to 55, and Shock of the Lightning in 2008 got to 93, and that's it. That's it.
See, I'm long gone by that point.
Well, exactly. How that goes. I mean, look, there's mainstream rock. There's you do Airplay, and Champagne Supernova gets in the top 10. Live Forever gets into the top 10, and Don't Go Away, Supersonic. Those are top 40 kind of hits, so people were hearing them. But it's not like over here. It's like, and they would go straight to number 1, but they'd be 2 weeks and they'd be number 1, or they fly right up there. So it's just kind of different culturally. But the fact of the matter is, these are fantastic songs that they're making, and they don't have an all-star team, right? I mean, by the time they got to Don't Believe the Truth, okay, Gem Archer's in. He's fantastic. Mm-hmm. He also looks good. He kind of looks like a young Paul McCartney, right? You got Zach Starkey in on the drums. He's the best there is of his generation. You got Andy Bell in there, who's kind of what Jackson calls a utility infielder. He plays the bass, he plays guitar, he plays keyboard, he can sing, he can do all to give them all these amazing textures. Sure, by then they can make whatever they want, but Tony McCarroll was kind of never up to it. I think Giggsy was a good guy and he could play, but he wasn't ready to be a rock star, and even eventually Bonehead couldn't really keep up with the whole lifestyle and all that. So they made this amazing record, but they didn't have all the pieces of the car really put together, to be honest with you.
No, and I think that was part of the charm of the band, because it was like they were a bunch of friends. They weren't musos that gathered, or I speak to people in the past and they answer the adverts on Melody Maker and they all get together and that's one band formed, that sort of thing. These seemed like a bunch of friends who picked up instruments, and Noel started strumming and said, oh, this one sounds good, and it just kind of hit a nerve and it worked. And like you said, that is the main lineup. I think Alan White in there instead of Tony McCarroll, because he just wasn't any good. But, and that's even an interesting one, the whole Alan White coming in, because he's the younger brother of Steve White of Style Council, so Paul Weller, and it was Paul Weller that recommended Alan to Noel Gallagher. So it's like, oh, there's a nice little celebrity twist there. So, but that was the band, and I think that was the problem as well after Be Here Now. I think the next album, Standing on the Shoulder of Giant, I don't know why it's just the one. It's a strange thing to say, but then that's what they named it. I think by that point the lineup had changed, and even the logo had changed, and do you know what I mean? The band had changed, and I don't mean that in a bad way. It just felt different. It wasn't what it was. Those first 3 albums for me were Oasis. What followed was then, I don't know, it was Mark II. It was all, Liam's voice was gone. They'd got to the point where they couldn't stand each other. Well, it's big business at
that point, right? I mean, like, the train has to keep going, right? Yeah.
So are you familiar with the term jump the shark?
I am, yes. Okay. Fonzie.
So well, exactly. And in the United States, it's kind of used, it's almost thought of as derogatory, but it's really not. It's like, it's the apex. And after you quote unquote jump the shark, it's not that it's bad, but it's never as good as it will. It will never be as good as it was at this point in time. Would you say that, like, that Nebworth show was like kind of the apex of where they were? Because I remember, I think Bonehead said something like, maybe we should have just shot the rockets off and said, good night, drop the mics, and that was it. Because it would never be the same way again. And that's what I kind of feel like. It's not that they're bad. It's just that was the time when they were kings of the world. And then everything else was kind of never the same, trying to recapture that. Yeah. I don't know. Like, it was just a different band, like you said.
I think you hit on something quite interesting there. I think for me as a fan, I would hold on to just when Be Here Now had been released. I think, again, it's been panned and a lot of people don't like it. And there are some poor songs on the record. But I think at that point they were at their peak, because there was that gap between What's the Story, we've got Nebworth, we've got everything. It's almost like the drum roll, it's drum roll, drum roll. And then Be It Now came out, was the symbol. And then it fell off, I'd say, just after the release, because I remember queuing up outside the shop at 8:30 in the morning, waiting to get the single, because by then you didn't have YouTube and all that sort of stuff where you get sneak peeks. It wasn't released. It was on the radio that morning when we were driving to get it. It was the first time we'd heard it. So it was me and my friend, and we literally did, as teenagers, queue up outside the shop to buy a copy, and they literally opened it just for everyone to go and buy that. Nobody was in there to buy anything but, do you know what I mean? And we went home and we put it on and we played it on repeat and repeat. And I can remember sitting and writing the lyrics out by hand, trying to work out what he'd said, and being blown away, because I still do think that is one of their best songs. I love that song so much. I love the textures, and even the video to it I think is brilliant, with the helicopters over the top and the military feel to it and things like that. I think so for me, I would say that was their apex. When they brought that single out, everyone, because that was universally loved, I think that was a great single, and then that was it. The moment had gone after that.
So I parallel them a little bit, even though they're completely different, to Def Leppard, in that Def Leppard is huge in the United States, but they really have a hard time getting arrested over here. But also Hysteria, which was a diamond seller in America. It also had, because they had 7-8 singles off of that, they had to have all these B-sides. And they did. They had fantastic B-sides. We talk about with our buddy Neil from Def Leppard Pod, how they essentially have a couple of albums here. Okay, just like they had 2 albums basically with What's the Story, Morning Glory. And if you get the anniversary, it's 3 CDs, because they've also got some covers and some great stuff on there. But the difference is Def Leppard had been together a decade, and they basically had 4 years to write Hysteria after Pyromania because of the car accident and everything that was going on with them. Whereas Oasis, this is our second album. The first album was awesome, has, killer rock and roll songs on it. Then we just step up and make 2.5 records worth of amazing material, sprinkling them out with singles over a couple years. And then, you get to Be Here Now, and you take the best off of that. Well, suddenly I feel like all of a sudden the cupboard's a little bare for Noel. Like, he had this incredible run, there's no doubt about it. But then all of a sudden it's like, well, what else do I have to do? None of you other people can write anything. None of you other can play the way I do. And plus, I'm rich. I've got my money. So I can put out kind of whatever, right? I mean, I don't know if that's really his attitude, but that can creep in. He doesn't have to sell 10 million of the last record. He sold 30 million of the last, right? So I don't know. It's tough to say.
It is. It's really difficult.
I was going to say, that's going to be a little irritating too if you're Noel, because, again, you've got pressure from the record company, you got pressure from the fans, you got pressure from the band. They're like, okay, what do you got?
What's next?
Big guy? What do you mean? What? Okay, so now I have to do all of this now. Okay, cool. Well, maybe I'll just pull you guys along. That's got to be a little, at some point in time, you have to start to think in your mind, I can do this by myself. And I remember when
very early he was thinking that, I think.
Don't Look Back in Anger came out, and I remember thinking, oh boy, now he's going to sing. Not only is he going to sing lead, which we've seen from other bands. We love the Keith Richards songs that he sings, but they were never really singles. This was a big single. And I remember even in the video, you've got Liam just kind of, maybe I'll sit
shaking
by
the tambourine.
Yeah, maybe I'll shake the tambourine. Yeah. So you get this deal where it's like, that causes cracks in the band too. And I think that was, we did a whole show on Get Back with the Beatles. You could see how, maybe if there was a low spot, okay, all of a sudden George comes in with a song, or Ringo's doing something. You got these other guys who are just, we gonna work today, or what's the deal? It's got to be very stressful for him. And to your point, Mac, I'm already rich. I don't need any. I don't need this. I don't need this headache. I don't need this hard time.
I'm already the biggest star in the UK. It's like, what more do you want me to do, sort of thing. It is interesting to bring up the whole the concept of a one-man band in a sense. I mean, if it wasn't for Liam and his incredible iconic look and stage presence, I mean, when we say stage presence, he wasn't the sort of guy that ran around and jumped on the riser or do you know what I mean? He was just he stood there in his Adidas tracksuit and just glared at people, but that was his stage presence. That was just incredible to look at, and very visually iconic and things like that, and the voice obviously as well. But just made me think of, I spoke to Andrew Farris from INXS recently. Now he had obviously Michael Hutchence to fall back on, but Andrew Farris was the main songwriter. He was the musical direction of it all, and Michael Hutchence came up with the lyrics. So at least they had the two of them to bounce off. Whereas, like you said there, Noel, he's been there, he's done it. He's got the multi-platinum selling discs on his wall. He's got every bank account full of cash. He's got girls dripping off his arm. He's got every tabloid newspaper wanting to know what he's eating for breakfast. It's like, what more do I need to do to satisfy anything? And it is interesting to see where it did go down from there. I mean, you mentioned him singing. I was never a big fan of his singing vocally. I mean, Liam is not a stereotypical singer. He's not got a beautiful voice, but I think he carries the band better than Noel. Okay. And I think when Noel started to bring in 2 or 3 different songs of his on the albums, that's when again it was like, no. Again, that turned me off, because for me, he wasn't the vocalist. I liked Liam being the vocalist. I liked him being the focal point on the stage. He had the gruff voice, whereas Noel was a bit whinier. I was never as big a fan of him, if I'm being honest. Although the song they did together, Acquiesce, was fantastic.
Oh my God. Yeah. The greatest B-side in the history of mankind. And to hear them together. But of course, that's when I kind of first saw it. I used to think it was so arrogant and shitty of Liam. He would just stand there. When he's singing his heart up into that microphone. And then when it's Noel's turn, he doesn't keep the crowd up. He doesn't shake the tambourine. He stands there and stares blankly. And now I'm like, that's pretty rock star, man. That's pretty like, I'm not singing, you're not looking at me. Fine, I'll just stand here like a statue. Like I'm doing anything else right now. But to me,
the thing is, even live, I mean, that first gig that I saw them, that was the last song they did. That was the end of the encore. And even though Noel was singing, you were still looking at Liam, because you were waiting to see what he was going to do. Yeah, exactly.
But that's the problem, though, because that's his job. His job is to be the singer, and now you're taking that away from him. If you've got the way that really works in other bands is if you also do, like, I also play the guitar.
Yes.
Like we just talked about the Cars recently, and you had Ocasek and Ben Orr. Yeah. And so when you're not singing, hey, I'm just playing the rhythm guitar like I do on any other one, or I'm playing the bass. Yeah, I'm the rock star, and now or
at least with Fleetwood Mac, Stevie, although she couldn't play an instrument, she did a lot of the harmony and the backing vocals and things like that, didn't she?
She could shake the tambourine,
Yeah.
And twirl the black dress and things,
Oh, she's beautiful,
I was going to ask too. You were talking about how when they came out, how many people started a band after that in their garage and sang, or at least tried to sing and tried to look like Liam with the microphone up, the hands behind their back. Yeah. I'm going to bet there were a lot of kids trying to emulate that.
Still are.
Like I said, we started a band on the back of that. We did. Myself, there was 5 of us, and after we broke up, 2 of them went on to form another band that played Glastonbury and were on Radio 1 and things like that. So they did quite well for themselves, my guitarist and bass player. Unfortunately, I went and did media studies at university. So yeah, we all take different paths, don't we? But yeah, to answer your question, everyone picked up the guitar. I mean, I was a drummer before that, but Oasis came out, and I fancy giving that thing a go with strings over there. And I taught myself, like I said earlier, several Oasis songs. It doesn't take long. You only have to move a couple of fingers half the time. Especially on Wonderwall. It's really, really simple. So to answer your question, everyone was turning up at college and things like that, and we all had the bowl cuts and the Adidas tracksuits, and it was the look.
Yeah, and eventually they learned how to deal with their eyebrows and separate them and keep them tweezed and stuff, and and they had the bod look, and they look great. But part of the reason I wanted to do this now, Paul, versus maybe later in the year, is both the boys are doing tours here in June of the UK, and I think Liam's going into further afield in Europe, but Noel is doing shows with the High Flying Birds around the UK, and lovely Liam is not only playing the Etihad one night, but he's going back to Nebworth for a couple of shows. So do you have any interest in seeing any of those? And, who would you rather see if you could only see one of them live? Who are you going to see?
Again, it'd be Liam, because I think he is the sound of Oasis. I mean, a guitar player can play a guitar, whereas Liam can only sound like Liam.
Right.
And I think Liam was the sound of Oasis. Noel did play up here 2 years ago. I mean, I live in the Highlands of Scotland, so I live pretty remote. But Noel did come up a couple of years ago, and I didn't get tickets.
Really?
And that's, I don't, like I said to you before, I think by the early 2000s, late 90s, I think Oasis had passed me by. I think I'd outgrown that.
Right.
If Liam came, I probably would, because I think he's a bit more open to playing the Oasis stuff, whereas Noel kind of just did 2 or 3, if that makes sense, in his set list. And that's the only reason I'd go and see something like that.
I hear you. I was fortunate enough to see Oasis a few times, kind of the Don't Believe the Truth and the subsequent tour that they did on that. I've seen Noel's High Flying Birds a few times. They even opened for Snow Patrol in America. I didn't catch Snow Patrol. Yeah, I'm like, what? It's like, I didn't even stay for Snow Patrol. I didn't stay for one song. Once Noel was gone, I'm like, all right, come on, honey, get your stuff. We're going, But I saw him headline a few times too. His band is great. He has grown, I think, as a songwriter. His first album was very Oasis-ish, but he's worked with a lot of different people. He has women in his band now to give it a lot of great flavor and texture. He has evolved a bit, and when he does an interview, it's only like every 12th word is fuck or something like that now. So he's more
matured.
Yes, he's a lot more articulate. He realizes, yes, I live in a $25 million mansion. I probably ought to use better vocabulary once in a while. But so my thing is, I love Noel, and I wanted to take my daughter to see him. He is playing London, so we're doing that. I'm not going to Nebworth to see anybody. I'm 50 years old. I'm too old to muck around in the mud. If I could go with the band on the helicopter, fly in, sit side stage, and then fly out with them, fine, guys. If you want me to come, we can do that. But other than that, I'm not dealing with all that nonsense. You got to be kidding me. 100,000 punters in the mud who've been drinking for 15 hours? I don't think so. Yeah.
And you've got somebody on stage who is going to rile them up, so it's going to be a mess.
Now, I'd love to see Liam. There's no doubt about it, And I like BDI's first record. It was kind of one of those rare situations that when a band breaks up, you actually get 2 decent units out of it. A lot of times, band breaks up and that's it. The singer sounds right, but he can't put the songs together about the band. The band's not right without the singer. But I thought BDI had some great songs, and then Noel put together a great band, and they did well. So. But Noel now, I mean, it's a lot like Oasis now. I mean, Gem's back in the band. They're using some of the same keyboard guys around. If you ever needed a pinch hit drummer, Zach could always fill in when he's not with the Who. Yeah. So it's kind of like everyone's kind of followed him. But I still feel like the kids are all about Liam. If you're under 25, if you're under 30, and you're going to see one of these two, it's Liam without a doubt.
Yeah. 100% agree. 100% agree. And I just want to say this is obviously my personal feelings. I'm not trying to say I'm quoting for the rest of the UK here. It's just the whole Britpop thing tired me out of it. So by the time the 2000s came, and like you said, I probably would have been a good gig to go and see Noel up here a couple of years ago. But it was just, I don't know. It's like I've done that. I've done that. I've been there. I've done that.
I understand outgrowing bands. In the 80s, early 90s, I was way into REM. Then Automatic for the People and Monster come out. Well, those are huge hits. Everybody loves them, right? Except me. I had evolved past that. I'm glad they did well. I'm glad other people enjoyed the music. But I stopped, at out of time, and glad they went on. But for me, it was over.
See, we flip-flop again there. I was huge into New Adventures and Monster and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, big fan of REM. Saw them a few times when they came over here. Saw them on the banks of Loch Lomond, actually. They did a big gig here on the banks of Loch Lomond.
That sounds
20 odd years ago. That was fantastic. Yeah, really good.
Cool. Well, anything else you want to add there, Jackson?
Well, I was going to say you're talking about the 2 different camps now. I think the real attraction for Liam is the rock star vibe that he gives out, but he's also the one of the 2 that's always, if you ask about Oasis, he's like, hey, just give me a call anytime, ready to go. Whereas Noel's like, yeah, next question, please. Right. And I actually saw Liam on some interview. It might have been Graham Norton, but I couldn't swear to it. And he said, oh, they offered you, Noel said it would have to be $100 million or something like that for him to think about it. And Liam said, the funny and so Graham Norton asked, so what's the problem? What's going on? What's the deal? And Liam said, it's 50% me and 50% Noel. But if you ask Noel, it's 100% me. And so that's the deal, is that I think that's what the attraction to him still is he's the one that's still kind of like, this flag gets smaller and smaller every year, but he's still waving it like he would be up for it, where I don't think Noel would be, because I just think
he doesn't need
if they ever got back together again, if Oasis ever said, we got this big tour plan ready to go, you better get tickets to the first show, because there's probably not going to be a second one.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. And I think, to be honest, they probably would get 100 million easy if they announced a tour tomorrow. So
easy.
I would go, as somebody that hadn't listened to the band for 20 years. I would certainly be out there getting tickets and wanting to see that experience again, just to relive it. But it's interesting. Maybe it's because Noel he was the centerpiece of the band's musical direction and everything like that. Because it's the same with Dire Straits. Mark Knopfler is Dire Straits, but obviously John Illsley and everyone else would in a heartbeat get back together and do it again. But Mark's always said no, not happening. So.
Mark doesn't need it. The main reason bands get back together after so long is because someone needs the money. Mark Knopfler does not need the money, and Noel Gallagher not only doesn't need the money, but he doesn't need the hassle. He has a nice life. He's making the music he wants. He plays the gigs he wants to. He sells records just fine. And now, for what? For $100 million, I got to deal with this nonsense for another 2 years? I don't think so. But I do think at some point it's going to happen, even if it's just like, we're going to do Nebworth 2025 or 2030, whatever it is. I doubt it would be for a good cause. It would just be for them to do it. Like Pink Floyd gets back together for G8 or whatever, or they get together to make a new single to help Ukraine. That's their thing. I just feel like Oasis would be okay, this is it. We're going to do 3 last shows or whatever it is. You're going to pay us whatever you pay us, and that's it. And I think at some point that's probably what will happen. But an album, a tour around the world, I don't know about that.
No, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. I mean, fingers crossed it does happen, because I think it's something that would be embraced. I think we'd all love to see the fireworks. I think we'd all... I'm keen to know how often they've been in the same room together, because obviously they're brothers, they've got family. How often do they actually get in the same vicinity? Or it must have happened at some point in the last 10, 15 years, surely.
Dude, not even at Christmas. They don't... Wow. I mean, they don't even go see their mother together, and they have kids who are cousins, and I don't even think they see each other, to be honest with you.
It's crazy, isn't it? I mean, funerals, surely they must turn up for things like that. I don't know. It's just
they might
families,
going to their father's funeral, from what I understand, but I don't think he's passed away yet. So
families, you can't pick them, can you?
No, that's right. Well, Paul, this has been a blast, talking about my favorite band of the last 30 years, Oasis. Foo Fighters would be a close second, certainly my favorite American band of the last 30 years, but I just find Oasis so much more listenable. And start to back of their records. I can put on Don't Believe the Truth or What's the Story, Morning Glory, and just let it go and let it repeat even, So I'm happy to finally get a real UK fan, someone who lived it, someone who loved it, and could teach us about it,
Well, thank you for letting me on the show. I mean, I'll be honest, I had not listened to Oasis purposefully. It's not, I've heard songs here and there, but I've not put on a record from Oasis for decades. So I did last night sit and go through all the songs on Spotify. I thought while I was working, I just put it on in the background. It was just playing one by one. And the records are fantastic. That first album for me still probably would get into my top 10 of all time, because it is just, and it's not just the singles, it's things like Slide Away and Columbia and Bring It On Down.
My Big Mouth, I love
them. Yeah. So, but again, I got to Standing on the Shoulders of Giants, and it was like a couple of songs into that, and I was like, oh, is that the time?
Right.
So I guess.
But honestly, like that's what we love about doing the show. I mean, the two of us. And I've got a coworker who I was like, hey, if you want to listen, go ahead and listen. And we did a show about Led Zeppelin 4, and he was like, you know what? I haven't listened to that record in probably 30 years.
Yeah.
And I put it on, and it's like an old friend coming over. Hey, yes. I remember this. So, I mean, that's really what we love about this is either, reintroducing this stuff or finding something new. And because music was such a big part and still is of our lives. It just kind of drives your day.
Yeah.
It really is fun to connect with people like yourself. And, I've never met you before, but I just spent an hour talking to you about a common love that we have. This is really fantastic.
Yeah, echo it 100%. I mean, music is something that unites people, and it's something that it doesn't matter what background you've got. I mean, you can share the love of a band, a song, an album, and it is some interesting when you talk about some of the big albums there. Led Zeppelin 4, I was trying to think, when was the last time I listened to Led Zeppelin 4? We know it inside and out. We could probably put it on now and sing every song, but I can't remember the last time I actually put it on and listened to it. Maybe that needs to be rectified.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, and it's good to have folks to enjoy this with. I recall when I got into Oasis, I want to say it was about 2001 or so. Call it a Saturday night. I've been out with some friends drinking, not getting after it, but I've been having a few beers. Gets late. I'm like, all right, midnight, I'm going to go home. I'm driving home, and I'm pretty sure it's Don't Look Back in Anger comes on the radio, okay? And I thought it was Oasis, but I didn't really know because I didn't know Oasis that well. And I'm jamming this Don't Look Back in Anger. I'm like, God, this song's amazing. And, of course, they don't always tell you that was Oasis with Don't Look Back in Anger. You have to kind of, oh, what was that? But in 2001 was the heady days of Napster when you could just go home and download whatever you wanted. So I was up till like 3 a.m. downloading all sorts of Oasis, trying to find which song it was, Don't Look Back in Anger. And then from there, I started to listen. And then Jackson and I had we'd grown apart during that time. We didn't have a falling out or anything. It's just we don't write letters.
Natural.
We're not social media people. He moved from his hometown. I moved from my hometown. We didn't have each other's stuff anymore. And I remember getting into Oasis and then getting Don't Believe the Truth and how awesome it was to me, but not having him to say, Jackson, do you know Oasis? Have you heard this Don't Believe the Truth? So that's why I'm glad now we've got the show so we can kind of share all this together again. Because when we were in college, except for maybe occasionally going to class, that's all we did was drink beer and listen to records.
That sounds perfect to me. And just one quick thing we didn't mention very much of. I know we brushed it quickly, but Wonderwall, in terms of, I mean, a huge hit in the US. You said it was top 10, I think, number 8. I think you said it was.
Yeah.
That was the song that seemed to cover all bases. It reached all generations because my granddad, because like I said, I lived with my grandparents, so my granddad knew it. My mum knew the song, and now I've got a teenage kids who know the song as well. They sing it, they love the song. It seems to be one of those songs, although it's been parodied, although it's been on the radio far too often, and it's one of those songs that probably annoys a lot of people, it still is an absolutely brilliant song when you break it down. And if you sit in a small box like I am in here in my studio and you put Wonderwall on and you give it the chance, you'll fall in love with it again because it is a fantastic song.
Yeah, and I think it's a song that if you said Oasis and someone was like, I've never heard of that band before, and you put that,
Yes.
oh yeah, I know that song. Yeah,
That's the one.
You're right. It's accessible. If you listen to the lyrics, they're not nonsensical, but it's just enough where it kind of draws you in. And yeah, that is a great song.
Yeah.
As a lyricist, I think Noel Gallagher is underrated. I know sometimes it's because I didn't like Champagne Supernova at the time because you're talking about where were you while we were getting high. I'm like, no, you're supposed to say that in code. You don't just come out and say stuff like that. Now it's a country song because in a country song you can't say I'm standing next to a mountain chopping down with the end of my hand. They don't know what that is. You say I see my beat up old tractor. It's broke down. You have to look out your window and see something and say it. And it's like we're sitting here getting high, but you gotta hide that somehow. And that's like, that's not that clever. But now I look at the way he wrote. Obviously, the music and the chords are brilliant, but the way he wrote his lyrics, I think, is top notch. I think he's one of the best of all time.
It's interesting because even some of the cheesier songs, likes of She's Electric, it was never a single, but the radio station that I worked for, it played the best songs of the last 10 years. It was a current, but they used to drop in every couple of hours something from the 90s, and they'd play She's Electric, even though it wasn't a single. And I think that is because it is easy accessible, and because, like you said, 1 in 5, 10 households or whatever it was had a copy of that record, so you'd know that song, despite the fact it was never a single.
For me, it's on that album, Hello. I feel like they should open every show with hello, and it's not hello, it's hello. It's got this charge to it, that thumping bass into it. It's got a little nastiness to it, and you listen to the lyrics. You wipe the shit from your shoes and that kind of thing. It's a fantastic Oasis song, but it's not just hello. It's it's like get ready, buckle up, we're coming at you.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing.
Absolutely.
The other great thing too is if you go back and listen to it, they don't rip off people, but they just kind of like, the wink, wink, like, you were talking about, don't look back in anger. That's Imagine at the beginning. You for a second, you think that's what it is. And then they go into their song, but it's like hey, John Lennon, we love you. We wouldn't be here without you.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about going back and listening to this, like Cigarettes and Alcohol. That's T-Rex.
That's T-Rex. Yeah.
Like
yes.
Yeah. It's their song, but it's just like that, where we came from. And so there's a lot of it. Like if you listen to it, it's, even if maybe you haven't heard it before, it's very familiar.
Yes.
Like there's a familiar, like, do I know this?
No,
but it sounds.
I think it's quite interesting. They've only been taken to court, is it a couple of times, maybe 3 times for different songs? One of them being the was it Stevie Wonder? They one of their B-sides, Stepping Out or Step Out Tonight or something like that. Is they had to put Wonder as Wonder et al. I think they put on the comments on the end.
Yeah.
But yeah, for how close they sail to the wind, they've not actually been pulled back many times.
That's right.
Yeah. But I think it's a difference between copying the song, like we had that whole thing, like what was it, that song Blurred Lines a couple years ago, and that was a ripoff of the Marvin Gaye song. You can't tell me it wasn't. But I think Oasis has always been better about, like I said, just giving you the wink, here's what we love, and then doing their own thing. Like if that piano part in Don't Look Back, if they had done that the whole time, they would have gotten sued. But it's only right at the beginning where it's like it's just like it's almost like holding a picture of John Lennon up and then putting
it's like paying homage, isn't it, to the
correct
to
the
artist,
exactly.
yeah.
All right, Paul.
Lovely. But it's been nice meeting you, Action.
Yeah.
And
nice to meet you. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem at all.
Well, that wraps up our discussion of Oasis with Paul Stephenson of Vintage Rock Pod, a good man and now a new friend of the show, guy who really knows his stuff and has that smooth radio voice. But it's a show I've really wanted to do for a long time, guys. I mean, a lot of our show is about the difference between being a UK rock fan and a US rock fan. And why are some bands popular in one place, but they just don't catch on in another? And to me, Oasis is a glaring example of that. You could not be any bigger than Oasis was in the UK in the 90s. And really, still to this day, as both the Gallaghers individually are touring in the month of June in the UK. And having Paul on to discuss what it was like to be here and to be a young man, a teenager, who was in the midst of all that, who couldn't wait to get out and buy the new album or buy the new single when it came out. And going to see them live meant everything to him. It's just a show I wanted to do for a long time, and until I found Paul, I didn't really have the right person to give us the perspective that we desired. So thank you, Paul, for that, and make sure you check out Paul on Vintage Rock Pod. I think he's at Vintage Rock Pod on Twitter, and he's got the daily This Day Rock Show. It's really only about 5-6 minutes out of your day, and it's a great way to start the day. It's a great way just to get caught up on whose birthday it is, what's happening in the world of rock, and to hear something from a guest, maybe somebody famous, maybe someone from one of your favorite bands, or maybe even some silly American like me. And as usual, folks, we want to know, did we get something right? Did we get something wrong? Did we miss the point? Did we leave out your favorite part? Please let us know. You can tweet us or DM us at ugly_werewolf or at ActionJack72. Make sure you download and subscribe anywhere you get your podcast, be it Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Play. Good Pods has been very good to us. As I'm recording this, it turns out we're number 5 overall in all music. We're number 4 in music commentary and number 3 in music history. And we appreciate the love and support of Good Pods. It's a great place to interact with podcasters and figure out the podcasts that are best for you. Now, once again, I can't really preview what we're going to be talking about next week because there's so much going on right here. For The Wolf right now, we've got a lot of fun interviews lined up that I know you guys are going to love. We've got some concerts coming up that we want to talk about and review for you. So you're just going to have to stay tuned, all right? Make sure you download and subscribe. And again, folks, if you're thinking about it, hey, give us a positive review. Okay, it helps us find more rock fans like you, helps spread the word of the show. And if we get word of it, or if you send it to us, we might just read it on the show. So until next week, rock and rollers, to all of you all around the world, be cool and stay safe.